So next up, I just want to talk about the glass itself, okay? So obviously when we're working on a door, we'll always be working on this side of the glass, all right? So the only obstacles you have are the obstacles I've spoken about on this side of the glass. The window mechanism and everything like that is on the inside of the glass, okay? So we don't need to, we don't have any concern with that at all. So the glass itself, when we're working on a door, every now and then there is an issue whereby you can crack the glass, yeah? So it's not something that you need to worry about every day by any stretch. So for example, as a company, we've been operating over 13 years now and we've broken 3 windows in that time, okay? So it's definitely not something that's gonna happen every day and definitely not something you need to be too concerned about. But there are 3 main reasons why this may happen, okay? So the first reason is if you use your wedge and you're a bit too heavy-handed with it, okay? So what we do is we wedge the glass open first and foremost, like so, all right? So with your wedge, you just need to apply enough pressure until it shows you a bit of resistance. You don't need to hammer it home too hard, okay? Because if you do, if you really go for it with your wedge, that's one scenario where you can actually crack the glass, okay? Another scenario is if you're applying too much pressure on the glass when you're using your rod to repair the dent, all right? So you're always gonna wanna be conscious of the glass itself when you're doing the repair. You don't want to be leaning with all your body weight and really applying a lot of pressure on the glass, because again, that's a classic example of when you might crack the glass, all right? And then the third reason that you may break the glass is if you are working on double glazed windows, all right? Now, most of the time they come with the top spec motors. So if you're I mean, certainly something like this, it wouldn't be double glazed. But if you're working on a nicer vehicle, there's a good chance it could be double glazed. But the way you're going to tell if it is double glazed is by the time you wind your window down, as you look onto the top of the last bit of glass that hangs out of the door there, you'll see that there are 2 clear panes of glass flush with each other, okay? They're very thin, they're only ever so slightly, both of the panes together are actually only ever so slightly thicker than a single pane. But by looking down and seeing that there are 2 next to each other, you'll know that that is double glazed glass, okay? And in that case, personally, what I always do is I would just tread that little bit more carefully, all right? The double glazed, I mean, the single glazed panes, the glass has got quite a bit of give. There's quite a lot of movement to it, but often because there's 2 layers of glass on the double glazed windows, they're so rigid, there's not quite as much play between them, and so they can crack quite easily, all right? So there are some dent companies out there who wouldn't even entertain a dent if it's got double glazed glass, okay? But personally, us as a company, as I say, we just tread that little bit more carefully when we're putting our rod in. We'll tread that little bit more carefully when we're feeding, sorry, the wedge. We'll tread that little bit more carefully when we're feeding the rod in the door. And also, we will only repair a minor ding. If it's a substantial dent that's going to take quite a bit of work and quite a bit of force, then more often than not, with a double glazed window, it's too much of a risk to repair. So in that case, we may walk away, but more often than not, we're good to go, all right? Okay, so the next thing we do, as I say, is we're gonna wedge the window open. So always make sure you're on this side of the glass, okay? So I always start by wedging the window ever so slightly by about 1 centimetre. And then what we do is we use what's called a window guard, okay? Or a window shield or a glass protector, there's various different names. You get plastic and metal guards. Now it's personal preference what you use. I always feel that the metal guards, they distribute the pressure on the glass over a bigger area, so some guys would prefer those. but also I always feel that sometimes with the metal ones, there's occasional risk that you may cut the glass, slice the glass. You know, you may leave a slight score on the glass, but that's only if the edges of your felt have peeled away slightly, okay? Which leads me on to the reason that I would always wedge the glass first before we slide our guard down, okay? So we make sure that we've got no grit on it. We've got felt on the back, which is going to go against the glass and protect the glass. And then we wedge it open, as I say, for two reasons. One reason is so it's not really tight and we're sort of risking scratching the glass. And the second reason is because if you don't wedge it first, over time, the felt on the corners of your guard is going to peel off. And then again, as I say, if it is a metal guard you're using and they're exposed, that's when you could get into difficulty and scratch the glass ever so slightly, all right? So as I say, wedge your glass first, and then feed your board in, making sure again that we're on this side of the glass, not that side of the glass. So we feed the board in, and say for example I'm working on a dent in this area here, we then take the wedge out, get it into position so that we're offset from it slightly. We don't want to be hovering right over the top of the dent, we want to be just set back from it slightly. And then again, I would put my wedge in at the end of the dent that we're working, okay? So always make sure that the wedge is as close to the area of the dent that we're working on, okay? And again, tap it in just enough until it shows a little bit of resistance, all right? So next up is the rod itself. So these rods that we use are by Ultradent, and they're quite good in that you've got an interchangeable handle, okay? So you can buy one handle and then you can buy various different lengths and shapes of rod. So they're an excellent tool. And they also have, every 45 degrees, you can change the angle slightly. So I always start just on the first 45 degree setting so that by the time I'm repairing the dent, my arm's not right in the glass there, okay? So what we do is we will feed the rod down into position. Now I always recommend you keep your rod nice and vertical, purely just so that you know where the rod goes in the door there, all right? And I would feed it down. What you can do is you can offer it up to the dent and sort of hold your fingers at the top of the window to know how far down to feed the rod. So you can feed down into this position here, okay? And then as I say, keep it nice and vertical because it's a damn sight easier to know exactly where the rod is in the door, all right? So then the rod's in position, stick the rod as close to the wedge as you can because you've got a lot more movement in that position. Obviously if our rod's further up here, it's a lot tighter and the movements are going to be really quite jagged, yeah? So just make sure that they're as close to the wedge as possible so we've got plenty of movement there, okay? Great.